What would you do if, on a bitter winter patrol, you stumbled on an Apache woman beaten and abandoned to freeze? Would you gamble your name and your neck to pull her from death, or ride on and let the storm finish her? That winter didn't just bite, it devoured. It wasn't the crisp sting you feel on a clear fall morning. It was a hunting cold that slipped into your bones and stayed there like it paid rent. For 3 years, I'd worn the star in Solitude Creek, a town that earned its name, and I'd learned the moods of our winters like a man learns a stubborn horse. But this season felt different, meaner, hungrier. The plains looked like they wanted to swallow light, sound, and anything living. My name is Jedodia Jedstone. I was 34, but I felt older than the hard gray peaks that ringed our valley. The war did that. It sanded off the boy I'd been and left a man who preferred quiet. It wasn't only the cannon smoke and screaming. It was the silence after, when the faces you couldn't save flickered in the fire like ghosts. I once watched a Georgia kid, maybe 17, bleed out while he talked about peach trees in his daddy's orchard. That memory rode beside me long after the guns quit, louder than any artillery I ever heard. I came west to drown out those echoes. I didn't find peace. I found a different kind of battle, against the land, against lawless men, and most of all against myself. My cabin sat 2 hours north of town, tight-built and small, a stubborn little fort. I told myself I chose that solitude. Some days I believed it. On the North Patrol, the wind played a high, lonely song through the pines, and the sound grated on my nerves. Vulcan, my big, steady gelding, smarter than plenty of men I've arrested, snorted steam that froze midair. My gray coat, lined with thick sheepskin, felt like thin paper against that cold. The wind slid through the seams and jabbed me with 100 tiny knives. I was locked in that frozen rhythm, mind drifting back to Georgia peaches turning red in the dust, when I noticed it. A dark lump at the base of a bare aspen, hunched against a snowdrift. A flaw in a world of white. Every instinct honed by war shouted trap. I hauled back on Vulcan's reins so hard he tossed his head. My hand fell to the colt on my hip, the holster polished smooth by habit. I studied the tree line for a glint of metal, a quick breath plume, any twitch that didn't belong. Nothing. The fresh snow-smothered sound. The quiet was so deep it felt loud. Curiosity is a risky habit out here. It beat caution anyway. I swung down, my boots sinking with a soft crunch. The air burned to breathe. I walked slow, careful, like a man stepping into a snare. Up close, the shape came clear. Not rags. Not an animal. A person. A woman. She was curled tight, trying to trap whatever warmth she had left. Her dress, fine deerskin once, was torn and shredded, and it kept out about as much cold as a thought. One shoulder lay bare, the skin that eerie blue-white you see on a lake at night in January. Black hair, shiny as a raven's wing, spread in the snow, each strand jeweled with cruel little ice crystals. Her high cheekbones and the beadwork still clinging to a torn strip of dress told me she was Apache. My stomach nodded. The cold hadn't done all this. Rips in the dress, bruises and raw skin where the hide hung away. This wasn't just survival gone wrong. Someone had used her hard and dumped her for the winter to finish her. A sharper cold cut through me, anger like ice. I dropped to a knee, gripped a glove in my teeth, and tugged it off. My fingers, numb and stubborn, found the hollow under her jaw. For a long, awful beat there was nothing. My heart thudded like it wanted out. Too late, I thought. Then it came, a faint pulse, thin as a thread and easy to miss. Barely there, but there. What next? If I brought an Apache woman into Solitude Creek, I might as well light a fuse and toss it into a powder shed. Folks still smarted from last autumn's raids. Fear and anger don't care much. about sorting guilty from innocent. To some men in town, men I'd shared whiskey with and hauled into a cell in turn, she was trouble with a face. Leaving her meant death. It would be like walking past that Georgia boy again. My father's voice rose up, low and steady under the shriek of wind. He was a blacksmith not prone to lectures, but when he spoke, it stuck. I saw him at the forge, firelight turning his face into harsh lines. Right is right, Jed. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Decision made. There was no other choice a man could live with. I slid my arms under her. She felt shockingly light, like a bundle of sticks, skin cold as iron. When I lifted, a faint sound drifted from her cracked lips, a ghost of a word I couldn't catch. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused, then slid shut again. She went limp, heavy as sorrow. The ride to my cabin felt like a year. I wrapped her in my greatcoat and pressed her to my chest. I could feel those tiny, hitching breaths on my ribs. Each one was a small miracle. Each pause was a cliff. I found myself praying, me who hadn't prayed in years. Words clumsy in a dry mouth. Just let her live. Let me get her home. That's all. When I finally saw the gray line of smoke from my chimney cut the dark sky, relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. I kicked the door in with my boot and carried her straight to the bed, my only bed, pulling the patchwork quilts over her. In the warm wash of lamplight, her hurt was impossible to ignore. Ugly dark bruises stained her ribs and thigh. On her shoulder lay an older mark, burned and deliberate. A brand. A claim. I'd seen marks like that on cattle, never on a person. My hands shook with a cold, clean anger. I fed the stove until it roared and put water on to boil. I shaved a bit of dried venison into a thin broth. I kept my hands busy while my thoughts ran ahead. Something heavy settled in my chest, more than pity, deeper than rage. Responsibility. I'd pulled her back from the edge. Like it or not, our lives had tangled. When the broth was ready, I sat beside her, lifted her head, and touched the warm tin cup to her lips. Her eyes opened, and now there was a spark working in them. Dark, deep-set eyes, carrying a fear that cut straight through me. Not a fear of dying. She looked like she'd already met death and nodded. This was fear of me, of what I might ask, of a price she couldn't pay. I pulled back, giving her space. I kept my voice low, steady, hoping tone could speak where words failed. "You're safe here," I said, rough in the quiet. "Name's Jedodia Jedstone. Folks call me Jed. I'm the Marshal. No one will hurt you here." She didn't answer. Her eyes drooped shut, but I thought I saw her body loosen, just a hair. Her breathing steadied. I dragged a chair to the bed and sat there as the night stretched. I watched her chest rise and fall, slow and even under the quilts. I didn't know who she was or what hell she'd crawled from. I only knew I'd made a choice on a frozen trail, and the quiet life of Marshal Jedstone had just ended. Gray dawn seeped in. I hadn't slept, not proper. I dozed in the chair, the Colt resting on the small table, my senses snared by every little sound. The soldier in me never learned how to stand down. Each time she whimpered in fevered sleep, my head snapped up and my heart kicked at my ribs. In the thin morning light, the blue tint had left her skin. It was pale now, the color of someone alive, not the dead chill of snow. I pressed the back of my hand to her forehead. The heat from the night had passed. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding, white fog in the cold cabin air. I tugged on my fleece-lined boots and fed the stove until it hummed. The cabin felt different, charged with a fragile purpose I didn't dare name. Outside, I cracked the ice on the water barrel. The cold hit my lungs like a fist. The world was gray and white and still. I scanned the trees out of habit. No tracks but mine. Whoever left her was long. Gone, buried by the storm. Back inside, warmth wrapped around me. She was awake now, eyes sharp, watching. She didn't move, like a cornered animal. Fear lived there, yes, but also a quick, weighing mind. She was measuring me. I set the bucket down slow, so the slosh wouldn't startle her. "You're awake," I said. The words felt big and clumsy. I realized I hadn't said a full sentence to anyone in a week. "I'm Jedstone, Marshal." She kept her silence, heavy as a quilt. Her eyes asked a dozen questions her mouth didn't. I poured a cup of water and held it out. She stared at the cup, then at me, back and forth like she was testing both. With effort, she pushed herself up, stiff as an old hinge. Her hand shook so much the tin rattled, but she drank small, careful sips, never taking her eyes off me. When the cup was empty, she spoke. One word, "Nia." Her voice was a dry whisper, like leaves skittering on stone. A name gives a person back to themselves. It was a small, hard claim. "I am still here." I nodded, saying it back so it would stick. "Nia." I warmed beans and bread, plain food that felt like something sacred. She ate slow, like her body had forgotten how. In daylight, the bruises looked darker. I made myself look away. The questions burned in me. Who did this? Why? But I knew better than to dig. Trust is fuel, and hers was running low. Push too hard, and you snuff the flame. I pulled on my greatcoat and took up my hat. "I have to ride into town," I said, hand on the latch. "Mail. Supplies." I paused, met her eyes, and put my promise in my voice. "You'll be safe here. The door bar strong. Would buy the stove. No one will bother you. You have my word." She gave the smallest nod. Her fingers tightened on the quilt like it was armor. The ride to Solitude Creek felt new. My mind didn't dwell on trails or tracks. It stayed in that cabin with the woman whose life had crashed into mine. I pictured her wary eyes, the map of hurt on her skin. I thought about town, about the pinned mouths and sharp looks that would greet even the hint of her. For 3 years, I'd kept a professional space between me and most folks. That space was gone now, and I couldn't find a part of me that wanted it back. At Croft's Mercantile, the bell over the door gave a cheerful jingle that didn't fit. Silas Croft looked up, his narrow face set in a permanent frown. "Marshal," he grunted. I gathered flour, coffee, salt. On impulse, I added a small tin of salve and clean linen. Silas's eyes flicked to the extra items and quantities. "Stocking up for a long winter, Jed?" he asked, voice too casual. "Something like that," I said flat. He weighed flour slow, heard the Barty boys jawing, said there were strange tracks up north. Not animal. He watched me, eyes bright with nosy interest. "I'll look into it," I said, laying down coins. I knew what he wanted. In a town this small, gossip ran faster than any horse. I needed to control the story before it controlled me. By the time I got home, the sun was bending low, shadows long and blue across the snow. Worry gnawed at me. I pushed Vulcan harder. Nia sat by the stove, wrapped in one of my quilts, when I came in. She'd found my small sewing kit and was trying to stitch the torn strap of her deerskin dress. The thread was too thick and the needle too big, but she worked with stubborn care. She looked up as I entered, and for the first time I saw something besides fear in her eyes. Not trust yet, but a tired recognition. I had come back. I set the supplies on the table. The truth of our situation settled between us. Her story was a book I hadn't opened, and like it or not, I was in it now. The cabin's silence wasn't empty anymore. It held waiting. The next days found a quiet rhythm. We were two solitary people learning each other's edges. My small fortress filled with the soft sounds of her being, the pad of socked feet, the whisper of a needle pulling through hide, the low sigh as she rested by the fire. Her presence hummed. under my routine, an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. She kept the quilt around her like a shield and kept sewing, patient and precise. Watching her one morning, brow furrowed, fingers growing steadier, it hit me how little I knew. Did she have family? Was someone searching? The questions pressed at me, but I held them back. Kindness meant room to heal, without demands. Or maybe I feared the answers, that someone would come and take her away, and my world would fall silent again. One afternoon, while I cleaned my rifle and the sharp smell of oil filled the room, she spoke, cutting the comfortable quiet. Why? Her voice was rough but stronger. I froze with a cleaning rag in the barrel. Why what? You carried me here. Her eyes were steady, clear. You could have left me. It was the right question, the one sitting between us since she woke. I leaned back and traced the lines in the table wood with my eyes. I could have given the easy answer, duty, the badge, the law. But that wasn't the whole truth. Seemed wrong, I said at last. I saw too much of that in the war. Men walking past the wounded because it was easier, because they had somewhere else to be. I swore I wouldn't be that kind of man. I lifted my eyes to hers, letting her see it. A man is what he chooses to walk past, and what he chooses to carry. I couldn't walk past you. She held my gaze a long time, searching my face for cracks. She didn't thank me. She gave a slow nod and went back to her sewing. But her hands moved steadier, as if some weight had slid off her. Maybe the weight of a debt she thought she owed. By evening she was stronger. She insisted on bringing in water from the barrel. I watched from the doorway as she stepped into the packed snow, barefoot, jaw set. When she stumbled, I started forward, but she caught herself, pride stiffening her spine. The sight of her raw feet on that frozen ground stabbed at me. Later, while she warmed them by the fire, I set a thick pair of my wool socks on the hearth and said nothing. She pulled them on without a word. I still noticed the way her shoulders eased. That night, after beans and salted pork eaten mostly in silence, I sat cleaning my Colt, the click and turn of the cylinder a steady comfort. Lamplight softened Nia's face. The bruises had started to fade, purple giving way to sickly yellow and green. The brand on her shoulder, when I glimpsed it as she moved, looked darker, like a scar that told the truth too plainly. I risked a small question, my voice gentle. Do you have people? Family somewhere? Her hands clenched tight in her lap. She stared into the flame, face unreadable. The quiet stretched. At last, she answered in a flat, final tone. Not anymore. Those two words carried a whole history. I knew that kind of loss. I'd buried my parents before the war and too many friends during it. I nodded once. I wouldn't ask more. We went back to our tasks. The silence changed, no longer a gap, but something shared. Later, when the fire sank to red coals and the cold crept in, I sat up in my armchair like I had every night. But I noticed the bed. She'd moved to the far side, leaving empty space. Her eyes were open, watching me. I hesitated. The invitation wasn't about closeness. It was about trust, thin as new ice, but there. To lie down would shift things between us. To stay in the chair would keep the careful distance. My body ached from nights on hardwood, but some stubborn part of me wanted to prove I meant no harm. I walked to the bed, took the spare blanket, and tucked it more snugly around her. Her fingers brushed mine, warm now. Rest well, Nia, I said, voice thick. I returned to the chair and let my eyes close. She shifted, a soft rustle, and the steady rhythm of her breathing filled the room. In that sound, I found a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The storm hit like a hammer. 1 minute the sky was dull pewter. The next, the world vanished in a white roar. I'd seen mountain winters before. I banked snow against the north wall, checked shutters, and hauled and stacked wood enough for days. The cabin felt like a ship tossing on a frozen sea. The wind clawed at the walls. Snow peppered the window like thrown gravel. The fire fought back, but the cold pressed from every angle. Nia sat on the bed, wrapped in my biggest quilt. She watched me with those dark, tired eyes, tracking each move. She'd eaten little. Color was creeping back into her face, but she was thin as a shadow. The shiver in her body was small at first, then harder, then constant. Pride can be the last thing a person owns. I understood. But this cold doesn't care about pride. It steals strength, then breath. I poured the last of the boiled water into a mug and gave it to her. Here. Her hand shook so much that water sloshed over. She drank, eyes drawn again and again to the window, where the storm raged. "It will not stop soon," she said, tight with worry I couldn't quite place. "Could be days," I told her. She said nothing, just pulled the quilt tighter, trying to shrink away from the cold and maybe from the memories it dragged with it. I moved around, checking and rechecking the same things, but my eyes stayed on her. The tremors worsened. She was losing ground. I decided. I crossed to the bed and sat. She flinched, went stiff, eyes wide in the firelight. I kept my voice even, stripped to plain sense. "Nia, you won't make the night like this. The fire's not enough. You're too weak. The only fix for this kind of cold is shared body heat." Her mouth flattened. I saw the fight in her eyes, fear of closeness, pride, and the simple math of survival. For a long moment, I thought she'd refuse. I would have honored it. I would have sat and watched, helpless and angry. Then she gave one sharp nod. A hard choice for life. I pulled off my boots and lay down, careful to leave space. The rope mattress creaked. I stared at the shadowed ceiling, every sense alive to her nearness. She held rigid at first, turned away. But the cold was a patient enemy. Slowly, inch by inch, she shifted closer. Her back touched my side. Her head settled near my shoulder. A small, cold hand hovered, then rested on my chest. Her pulse fluttered against my shirt like a trapped bird. I didn't move. I didn't pull her in. I just lay there, warmth offered with no terms. My breathing stayed steady. In time, the hard shivers eased to small trembles, and then to stillness. In that quiet, with the storm howling outside, questions floated between us. Who had branded her? Who had beaten her? What had taught her to fear a simple, gentle touch? And what did it mean that this stranger now lay in my bed, our lives tethered by shared heat? Her voice came small, almost lost in the fabric of my shirt. "I thought I would die out there." I closed my eyes and waited. A quick, sharp breath broke in her throat. But I woke up here. I turned my head, my cheek brushing her hair. Wood smoke and something that was just her clung there. Our eyes met in the flicker of the fire. No thanks in her look yet, something truer. She had stared into the dark and come back. "Not on my watch," I said, voice rougher than I meant. "As long as I'm breathing, you're safe here." She studied me, then let the last of her stubborn guard fall. Her head settled fully on my chest, her fingers uncurled. Soon, her breaths fell into the slow rhythm of sleep. I stayed awake a long time, listening to two sounds that held my whole world, the wild scream of the storm and the steady breath of the woman beside me. This wasn't romance. It was survival. Still, I knew something had shifted deep down, and it wouldn't shift back. By morning the storm had spent itself. The world lay remade in white, drifts high as fences, snow banked halfway up the cabin walls. A holy quiet, the kind that makes you whisper. I moved softly, not wanting to disturb the new peace. Nia slept on her side, one hand resting where my head had been. The harsh lines on her face had eased. For the first time, I let myself really see her, not as a problem to fix or a threat to gauge, but as a person. Strength lived in the set of her jaw, dignity even now, and resilience that humbled me. I stoked the fire and boiled coffee, habits as old as my badge. They felt both comforting and small. Keeping her alive was one thing. The next part was harder. Solitude Creek, with its tight opinions and long grudges, loomed in my mind. Questions would come. My distance from the town had once protected me. Now it might paint a target on us both. I set a steaming mug on the crate by the bed. The smell tugged her awake. Weariness settled back over her features when she remembered where she was. She had survived the storm. The real one, I feared, was waiting. "You'll need your strength," I said softly. "We have to go into town." Her body went rigid. Her fingers clutched the quilt. "Town," she whispered, dread as plain as the cold. I nodded, thinking of what would meet us there. "I'm near out of flour and coffee. We need proper bandages and medicine. The salve is almost gone." I let the simple needs sit a moment, then told the hard truth. "If I ride in alone, snowed in for days, and buy twice the usual supplies, tongues will wag. Someone will ride out to sea. Better they see you with me, under my protection. Better we face it on our terms." She searched my face, trying to find the lie. I saw the math in her eyes, fear of town against the danger of being found here. She had no reason to trust the world. I held her gaze and put everything I had into the promise. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Nia. I give you my word, as Marshal and as a man." By mid-morning, the sun glittered on new snow, so bright it hurt to look. I saddled Vulcan and rigged a second seat behind the saddle with a blanket and rope. Nia came out wrapped in my spare coat. The heavy sheepskin dwarfed her. She squinted in the shine, eyes scanning every edge of the white world, as if trouble might sprint from any direction. She moved like a deer stepping into a clearing. I helped her mount. She sat behind me, hands light at my hips, not closeness, balance. The touch was barely there, but somehow it warmed more than the sun. We moved slow through deep drifts, Vulcan's breath puffing in clouds. Near town, a knot tightened in my gut. I knew the eyes that would watch. I knew the talk that would follow. I'd worn the star here 3 years. Folks respected me, but didn't know me. Today, I would bring the outside to their doorstep. I had already broken my own silence. There was no stitching it back. Main Street held its breath as we turned in. A rancher went still, hand on the livery door. 2 women, bent over a basket, stopped whispering and stared, faces hard. The saloon doors flapped, and a pair of rough faces leaned out, curious and cruel. I kept my face cold and flat, my hand resting easy on the colt, a quiet warning. I swung down in front of Crofts and helped Nia to the ground. She trembled, but once her feet touched wood, she stood straight. She kept her head low, hair hiding her face, but I saw her back stiffen. Pride even now. The bell screeched us in. Silas Croft looked up and went stiff as rawhide. His thin lips vanished to a line. His eyes bounced between us. "Marshal," he said, false friendly, sharp underneath. "Didn't know you were entertainin' company." I ignored the bait and set my list on the counter. Flour, coffee, bandages, salve, a bar of lye soap. My voice was low, but it carried the steel everyone in town knew. "Fill the order, Silas." His pebble-hard eyes slid to Nia with a look that made my hand itch. "You sure this is wise, Jed? Folks are unsettled." I met his stare and let him see exactly what would happen if he pushed. The room shifted. The few customers suddenly fascinated with their boots. Silas weighed his choices. He turned and started measuring flour. Outside, the whispers gathered like flies. No one came close. The badge and the way I stood kept them back, for now. Back at the cabin, dusk settled and the fire woke up. Nia stood by the hearth, the quilt back around her shoulders, watching flames like they might answer something. They hate me, she said. Not a question. Just a fact. I hung my hat and gun belt and faced her. Firelight played on her calm, tired profile. They don't know you, I said. People fear what they don't understand. I stepped closer, and they'll think twice before letting that fear cross my path. She lifted her eyes to mine, dark as a midnight pool, and in them I saw pain, but also the faintest glow of something else. Maybe hope. And if they come for me anyway, she asked, they'll have to come through me first, I said, steady as the mountain line. For the first time since I found her, something eased in her face. A long breath shuddered out, like a heavy pack set down. Not trust yet, but the ground where trust might grow. As I watched her in the firelight, I knew my life was tied to hers now, and there was no untangling it. That night, the fire snapped and popped while snow settled deep outside. Nia stood close to the heat, the quilt around her shoulders like armor. They hate me, she said again, more to the flames than to me. They're scared, I answered. Fear makes folks small, but they'll think hard before letting that fear turn into action while I'm here. Her gaze lifted, steady and searching. And if they still come, then they meet me first, I said, voice flat as stone. Something eased in her face, a breath she'd been holding since the snow. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the soil where trust could take root. Watching her in that warm light, I understood there was no going back to the quiet man in the quiet cabin. Our paths had tied together, and the knot was tight. Days slipped by, and the world stayed white and hushed. We fell into a simple pattern. Small meals, mending, gathering wood, and long stretches of quiet where the only sounds were the stove and our breathing. I learned how she moved when she was tired, how she held herself when pain woke. She learned the rhythm of my steps on the porch, the way my hand always checked the latch twice without thinking. When the snow packed down enough to ride again, I took short patrols, wide arcs that let me watch the edges of our world. I looked for tracks, for signs of whoever had left her, for trouble in the making. Each time I returned, I saw the same thing when I opened the door. Her eyes finding me first. Not hopeful exactly, more like bracing for bad news and uncoiling when it didn't come. The brand on her shoulder lingered in my mind. It wasn't a ranch mark I knew. It had the look of something a cruel man might heat over coals to call a person property. I didn't ask. She didn't tell. Some truths come when they're ready. One evening, heavy clouds stacked over the ridge, and I felt more storm on the way. I set a fresh log on the fire and sat across from Nia at the table. She worked a tight stitch through the repaired strap of her dress. Town will keep talking, I said. There'll be more looks. Maybe worse. She didn't stop sewing. You could tell me to go, she said, not as a challenge, just a simple fact in the air between us. I shook my head. I won't. And even if I did, the snow and the men who did this, I let the sentence die. We both knew what waited out there. Silence settled back. She tied off the thread with careful hands. After a long moment, she said, in my people's way, there is a word for a person who stands for another when the wind turns cold. Not kin, not lover, something in between. It means the one who does not step aside. I nodded once. That'll do for me. The next morning, the sky opened into sharp blue, and the air snapped crisp. It felt like a day to test the town again, to take the measure of folks before rumors grew teeth. We rode in afternoon. The street was busier, boots and wagon wheels pressing hard circles into the snow. The saloon piano stumbled through a tune. The blacksmith's hammer rang like a dull bell. Eyes followed us. I kept mine forward, face calm, hand resting easy. We stopped at Doc Avery's. He was a spare, gray man with hands that knew how to be gentle. He didn't say a word when he saw Nia's shoulder. He cleaned and covered the worst of her cuts with careful work and quiet breath. He gave me a small tin of stronger salve and told me how to use it. Voice even, eyes tired. He didn't ask for coin. I left it anyway. As we stepped back onto the boardwalk, a knot of ranch hands drifted from a saloon, drink making their courage loud. One of them, a big fellow with a scar across his nose, looked at Nia like she was a stray dog he'd kick from a doorway. "Marshal," he called, grinning. "You adopted now?" I set my stance, not wide, not tight. "Move along," I said. The words were quiet, but they carried. He rolled his shoulders, testing, then glanced at my badge, at my hand, at my eyes. The smirk died. He shrugged and turned away, taking the others with him like trash on a wind shift. The street exhaled. We got our supplies. Flour that didn't need questions, more coffee, clean linens, a better needle, and thread thin enough for deerskin. People stared and whispered. No one stepped in our path. We rode out with the sun behind us, long shadows pointing home. That night, I sat by the window, turning what had happened over in my mind. The town wasn't kind, but it wasn't a mob either. Not yet. Lines were being drawn. Some folks would look away. Some might step up. A few would be itching for a fight. All of it sat on my shoulders, whether I liked it or not. Nia moved quiet behind me, the quilt around her. "You're thinking of what comes next," she said. "I am." "Do we run?" "No," I said. "We live. We don't hide. And we don't pick fights, but we don't shrink either." Her chin lifted a fraction. "Then we live." In the days that followed, we kept to that choice. I taught her Vulcan's easy manner and how he liked his bridle set. She mended the coat I'd worn thin across the shoulders. I showed her how to mind the stove draft, so it wouldn't smoke the room when the wind changed. She showed me a trick for binding a cut with tight stitches that would heal flat. Small lessons. Shared work. At night, sometimes she woke with a hard jerk, breath caught, eyes open and not seeing the room. I didn't touch her then. I spoke low from the chair. "You're here. You're safe." The words became a steady path she could find in the dark. After a time, she'd return, breath easing, shoulders loosening. Then she'd slip back to sleep, and I'd sit listening to the soft hush of winter beyond the walls. I didn't ask about the men who hurt her. She didn't volunteer it. Trust grows slow where it's been cut back to the root. But on a cold afternoon, when a thin sun skimmed the drifts like a coin on water, she rolled up the sleeve of her dress and touched the edge of the brand with a fingertip. "This mark," she said, her voice flat again, "belongs to men who sell people like cattle. They take from both sides, where no color but coin." I escaped. I ran. I did not outrun their friends. The words sat in the room like ice. Rage rose in me, clean, focused, steady. "If they come," I said, "they won't leave." She studied my face, as if weighing that promise and finding it heavy enough to hold. Sooner or later, word always finds ears it shouldn't. It came on a day when the sky looked innocent and the cold lay quiet. I saw them long before they reached the cabin. 3 riders skirting the tree line, not moving like hunters, but like men who think the world belongs to them. Their coats were plain, their horses good. And even from a distance, I could see they sat their saddles with the lazy confidence of men who didn't worry about getting shot in the back. One carried a coiled rope tied with a neat, practiced knot. My eyes went to Nia, and hers went to me. No fear showed on her face, only a tired readiness. "Inside," I said. She nodded and slipped in without a word. I took the rifle and stepped onto the porch, the wood cold under my boots. The men pulled up out front. The leader smiled like he was greeting a neighbor. "Marshal," he said, hat tugged just a fraction. "Fine morning." "Say your piece," I answered. "We're looking for a runaway," he said, all friendly. "Belongs to a partner of ours. Got branded proper. We aim to take her back." No trouble if you stand aside. I let the quiet stretch until the smile wavered. You're talking about a person, I said, voice flat. Not a calf. And this is my land. My cabin. No one is dragged from it. He studied me a beat, then sighed like a man disappointed that a fine dinner got burned. Hate to pull rank on the law, Marshal, but this here's business. Then your business ends here, I said. His eyes narrowed. He shifted his reins, and the other two loosened in their saddles. Hands drifted too close to gun butts. I lifted the rifle, not at their chests, but a hair to the left, and put a round through the hat of the man on the right. The hat sailed off, and the bullet chewed a neat hole through the snowbank behind him. The sound cracked across the clearing and rolled back from the trees. No one moved for one long breath. Then the leader's smile vanished for good. You'll make enemies, he said softly. More than you can count. I already have, I said. We stood with winter holding its breath. Finally, the leader made a small gesture with 2 fingers. The men turned their horses. Before they moved off, he looked back and said his words like nails. We'll be seeing you, Marshal. I watched them shrink to dark dots and vanish into the trees. Only when the last hoof beat faded did I lower the rifle. My hands were steady. Inside, Nia stood by the door, jaw clenched, eyes watching me. You shot the hat, she said, a small light behind the words. Seemed a fair place to start, I said. A breath came out of her like a laugh she didn't expect. It was small and quick, but it warmed the room more than the fire. After that day, nothing much changed on the surface. We still cooked beans and bread. I still split wood. She still sewed. But a wire tightened between us and the town, between us and whoever those men answered to. I wrote a letter to the territorial judge, describing the brand and the claim. I knew the law was slow and far away. Still, words on paper can be a kind of stake in the ground. Weeks stretched and the snows eased. The valley's edges softened. One morning, I spotted a line of geese cutting the sky, and Vulcan lifted his head like he could feel spring in their wings. Nia stepped outside without her quilt and stood with her face tipped to the light. Some color had come back to her cheeks. When she looked my way, she didn't look past me or through me, but at me. It felt like standing in a doorway with a warm fire at your back and a wide, open road ahead. Solitude Creek stayed itself, suspicious, stubborn, slow to change. But the town learned something too. If you wanted trouble with the woman who lived in the marshal's cabin, you had to ask trouble from the marshal himself. Most people, even the mean ones, aren't that eager when they weigh the cost. What happened to us after that, how many men we faced, what lines we crossed, how the town shifted around us, that's a longer tale. But the heart of it sits in a single choice made on a frozen trail. I could have turned away. I could have let the snow cover her, let the cold do what cruel hands began. No one would have known I was there. No one but me. That's what matters in the end. Not the loud victories people cheer, but the quiet decisions you make when no eyes are on you. We are measured not by what we dodge, but by what we lift and carry, even when it's heavy, even when it bites into your shoulder. The past leaves marks that never fully fade. But when you offer warmth, dignity, or simple protection, you don't just help the person in your arms. You patch something in yourself too. The world can feel colder now than it ought to. It can feel split and mean. But small, steady acts of courage still move like campfire, light through the dark. No matter your age, you can still choose to stand firm, to guard what's right, and to be the person who doesn't step aside when the wind turns hard. If stories like this speak to you, tales of dusty streets, hard choices, and unlikely courage, make sure to subscribe. We share more true grit Western yarns, clashes, reckonings, and quiet heroes you won't forget. Tap the next video on your screen for a twist-filled ride that'll stick with you. Share this story and join our circle of Western fans. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far the spirit of the frontier travels. This playlist is for folks who want the real feel of the West, raw, human, and honest.